He hadn't spoken in 3 days. The machines beeped, the rain tapped on the window, and his family stood in silence. He'd fought fires for 40 years, never cried, never cracked. Now, all that was left was his breath, slowing until he whispered one thing: "Bring me my dog." They thought he was confused. His old fire dog had been rehomed years ago when the disease took over, but his daughter, she knew. She drove hours to bring the golden retriever who'd once pulled bodies from burning rubble. When the dog entered the room, he didn't look at anyone else. She walked straight to his side, rested her head on his chest, and didn't move. And what he said next left the entire room frozen. Like, share, subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from. We read every comment. The machines hummed steadily in the quiet hospice room, each beep a reminder that time was still ticking, even as life slowly slipped away. Outside, rain tapped against the window like a slow metronome. The sky hung low and gray, casting a dull light across the sterile space. It was the kind of day firefighters hated, wet, bone-chilling, heavy with silence. Thomas Hale lay still in the bed, his chest rising and falling with unnatural rhythm, pulled along by the oxygen machines beside him. At 68, the disease had taken everything from him, his strength, his voice, and now his time. His skin was pale, stretched thin across sunken cheeks. His eyes didn't close, but they didn't see either. 3 days without a word. He'd spent 40 years inside fire. Not around it, inside it. He was the one who ran when others froze. The one who kicked down doors, who went back in for the trapped, the forgotten. He had scars on every limb, burns he never treated, lungs full of ash and grit. He never complained, never once took a promotion, just kept showing up the Engine 47's backbone. Until the backbone cracked, his family stood close, unsure of what to say in a room where everything had already been said. His wife sat in the corner, hands folded, lips pressed into a line. His son stood by the window, staring out but not seeing, and next to him, his daughter, Emily. She was the only one still watching her father, like he might suddenly open his mouth and bark orders again. She had been the one who brought him here. The one who listened when the doctors said there was nothing more they could do. The one who packed the small bag with his essentials, which, for Thomas, meant only 2 things: his old station jacket and a medal he had never opened. On the side table next to the bed, propped between a Bible and a cup of untouched water, was a framed photo. Engine 47's crew. Young, strong, smoke-streaked. And right there in the middle, tucked against Thomas's leg, sat a golden retriever in a red search and rescue vest. Bailey. She wasn't just a dog. She had been his partner. 12 years of crawling through collapsed buildings, sniffing for gas leaks, alerting for heat pockets. She once pulled a child out by the shirt collar after a daycare fire nearly turned deadly. She'd been awarded, photographed, celebrated, and then quietly rehomed when Thomas got sick. No one had mentioned Bailey in a while. Not since the hospital visits began. Not since Thomas stopped asking for her. Until now, Emily had been holding her father's hand when it happened. A squeeze, sudden and soft. His mouth, dry and cracked, had moved, and with barely a breath he'd said it. "Bring me my dog." The room had gone still. Emily hadn't hesitated. She didn't look to her mother, didn't wait for agreement. She just grabbed her keys and left. Now, 2 hours later, she was racing back, soaked from the rain, a trembling golden retriever curled in the back seat, unsure of why she was being pulled from retirement and silence. Back in the hospice room, the beeping continued. Slower now. Thomas Hale still hadn't moved, still hadn't spoken, but something had changed. Something was coming, and for the first time in days, maybe weeks, the room felt like it was holding its breath. Emily pulled into the hospice parking lot like she was arriving at a call, hazards blinking, tires spitting water. She threw the door open, rounded the back, and opened the rear door. Bailey didn't move at first. She was older now. Gray had crept into her muzzle, and the proud red of her rescue vest was faded, frayed at the seams. Her body was slower, hips stiff with time. But her eyes, those golden, soulful eyes, still scanned the world like it was her job. Emily knelt down and whispered, "It's time, girl." "He's waiting." Bailey tilted her head, then stepped out into the rain. The automatic doors parted with a hush as they entered. The nurses at the desk looked up, surprised but silent. No one questioned a daughter walking a dog like that through those halls, not when her face looked like that. Room 204, second on the left. Emily's steps slowed as she approached. Bailey walked beside her, calm but alert, tail low, eyes forward. Inside, nothing had changed. Thomas Hale still lay motionless. The room still whispered with machines and rain and the weight of impending goodbye. But when Bailey entered, everything shifted. She didn't bark, didn't hesitate. She walked straight toward the bed, stopping just inches from it. Her nose twitched once, twice. Then she sat, not facing Thomas, but looking up at him. Emily stepped around, standing beside her. "Dad," she said gently. "She's here, nothing. No twitch, no breath change." Just that slow, mechanical rhythm, oxygen hissing soft in the corner. Bailey inched forward. She placed her front paws on the edge of the bed, gently, respectfully, and leaned in. Her nose found his chest. She sniffed once, then rested her head there. Stillness. Emily swallowed hard. "Dad, do you feel her?" Bailey stayed like that, unmoving, pressing into his chest like she was listening for something the machines couldn't hear. Her breathing was steady, her eyes half closed. She was still the partner she had always been, silent, present, ready to carry the weight. One of the nurses peeked in and froze. Emily didn't even glance up. Thomas didn't speak. But something, subtle like wind shifting, passed through his face. A soft exhale, slower than the rest, and then his hand twitched. The fingers moved, barely lifting from the sheet. Bailey's ears perked. Emily grabbed his hand. "Dad, she's here. She's really here." His lips parted, dry, cracked. The words came like they were being carried out of a burning room. "Only partner I ever trusted." Emily's throat tightened. Her knees nearly buckled. Bailey didn't move. She just stayed there, pressed to him, as if she knew this was the call that mattered most. More footsteps now. His wife had stood up. His son moved in closer. No one spoke. The room was silent except for the machines, the rain, and the sound of a dog breathing into her old partner's heartbeat. And then Thomas did something no one expected. He smiled, not a big one, just the corner of his mouth, pulling upward, barely there. But it was the first in weeks. He hadn't smiled for the doctors. He hadn't smiled for the medal. But for her, for the dog he'd run through hell with, he found that final bit of himself. Bailey gently stepped down, sat again, and leaned against the bed. Her job was done, and yet something else was coming, because when she sat, she looked over at the jacket on the chair, Thomas's old firehouse jacket, and gave a low, soft whine. Emily turned toward it. What was she sensing? Something was still unfinished. Bailey's low whine lingered in the air like smoke, quiet but unmistakable. Emily turned toward the jacket on the chair. Thomas's old firehouse coat, worn and sun-faded, hadn't been touched since she placed it there 2 days ago. His name was still stitched above the breast in black thread. Hale. The jacket still smelled like soot and time. Bailey stood slowly. Her body moved like she'd done this 1,000 times, not with speed but certainty. She padded toward the chair and stopped in front of it. Another soft whimper escaped her, higher this time, more insistent. Everyone in the room looked up. "What is she doing?" Thomas's wife asked, voice barely above a whisper. Emily stepped forward, crouching next to the dog. "Bailey?" she asked, gently placing a hand on her back. Bailey didn't move away. Her eyes were fixed on the jacket. She leaned forward and nudged it once with her nose. Then again, Emily stood and carefully lifted the jacket from the chair. It was heavier than she remembered. A faint clink came from the inside pocket. She reached in. Her fingers closed around something hard, something square. She pulled it out. A box. Small, velvet firehouse red, of the kind that held medals. The kind her father had always refused to open. He'd received it after the Haverhill fire. The worst of his career. An apartment building collapsed mid-rescue. He pulled 3 people out, including a fellow firefighter. But a fourth, not a boy, maybe 9 or 10, never made it. He never talked about that call. never wore the medal, just boxed it and put it away. Emily opened the lid. Inside was the Medal of Valor, its shine dulled only by time. Bailey stepped closer, nose brushing against the box as if recognizing it. Then she moved again to pass the chair to the small duffel bag near the wall. Another soft whine. Emily's brow furrowed. "What is it, girl?" Bailey sniffed the bag, then pawed at it, gently, rhythmically. Like she used to when signaling heat behind a wall or a trapped survivor, Emily reached down and unzipped the bag. There, under folded sweatshirts and a photo album, was something no one expected, a child's shoe. Burnt, the laces melted, the sole blackened with soot. Small, maybe size 4. Emily's heart stopped. "Oh my God," she breathed. The others leaned in. His wife's hand flew to her mouth. "That's from Haverhill." Thomas hadn't kept any trophies. Never brought home mementos. But this? He had hidden this. Not for pride, for pain. Bailey stared at the shoe, then turned back to the bed. Thomas's eyes were open. He wasn't looking at the ceiling anymore. He was watching her, watching his partner work. Emily stepped to his side, holding the shoe gently in her hands. "Dad, why did you keep this?" He blinked, slow, deliberate. Then, with a breath that cracked in his chest, he whispered, "He didn't have anyone. I didn't want him to be forgotten." The room was silent. This wasn't guilt. It wasn't shame. It was grief, the kind that finds no words, no place to land, and so it stays. It festers. And he'd carried it silently until the one soul who knew him best walked in and led them to it. Bailey returned to his side. Curling up at the foot of the bed, she had found what he couldn't say. She always had. And as the beeping of the machine ticked onward, softer now, Thomas closed his eyes, not in pain, but in peace. But he wasn't finished yet, not until one last thing was said. The room was still, like the air after a fire burns out, thick, silent, waiting. Thomas Hale's eyes were open again, but not in confusion or fear. They were clear, focused. Emily stood beside him, the burned child's shoe cradled in her hands like something sacred. Bailey remained curled at the foot of the bed, still as stone, eyes never leaving her partner. The Medal of Valor sat open on the table, its ribbon glowing softly under the muted ceiling light. His voice came again, dry but stronger than before. "I kept it, because no one asked his name." Everyone leaned in, not physically but emotionally. You could feel it, the gravity of a man cracking open the vault he'd sealed decades ago. We pulled 3 out. Cameras were there, medals, hugs, but the kid, they never found his parents. No one claimed him. They listed him as unidentified minor male. He paused. Emily gripped the shoe tighter, knuckles white. "I saw his backpack. Had a little badge on it, a cartoon dog wearing a fire hat," I thought. Maybe he wanted to be one of us. Maybe he looked up to us. Another breath, shallow, rattling. So I took the shoe. Just one, not for evidence. For memory. He turned his head slowly toward Emily. I knew if I kept it, I wouldn't let myself forget, because no one else would remember him. And if no one does, then he dies twice. Tears streamed down her face now. Not sudden, not explosive, just quiet and constant, like the rain still tapping against the glass. Thomas closed his eyes but continued. "Bailey, she found him. She barked, she scratched, she knew. I couldn't get to him." Beam collapsed. Bailey lifted her head just slightly at the sound of her name. She didn't move from that spot until we carried her out. She knew he was gone. His hand shifted slightly on the blanket. Emily reached out, lacing her fingers into his. His grip was weaker now, but it was still there. "I couldn't save them all," he whispered, "but I could remember one." Bailey slowly stood again. Her bones cracked softly with age. She pattered around the side of the bed, placing her front paws up onto the mattress again. One at a time, she leaned in, just as she had before, and laid her head across his chest, listening, and that's when it happened. Thomas brought his hand up and slowly, shakily, and rested it on her head. His fingers curled into her fur. "You never let me forget," he whispered, voice trembling. "You were always the better half of us." There it was. The truth, not in the medal, not in the shoe, not even in the words. In that moment, man and dog, 2 halves of the same fire-worn soul, spoke in a language deeper than voice, and everyone in the room felt it. His wife stepped forward, hand to her mouth. His son turned away, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. Even the nurse in the hall, still half watching through the cracked door, stood frozen, because this wasn't a goodbye, it was a confession, a healing, a legacy, passed in silence, through fur and breath and the kind of love that doesn't ask for words. Thomas Hale had carried his pain like a medal no one could see. And now, at the end, it had been found, not by the people closest to him, but by the partner who had once followed him through flames. Bailey shifted again, and let out one long, slow sigh. Thomas's hand relaxed. The machine still beeped, but something had just ended, or maybe begun. Thomas Hale passed quietly just before sunrise. The machines didn't scream. The lights didn't flicker. There was no dramatic gasp for breath or whispered farewell. Just a stillness, final and full, as if the weight he'd carried for 40 years had finally lifted, and he could finally rest. Bailey didn't move for minutes. She stayed there, head on his chest, eyes closed, as if standing guard until she was certain. Until she was sure he was really gone, Emily stood at the foot of the bed, her father's hand still warm in hers, the burned child's shoe now resting on the blanket beside him. She didn't speak. No one did. Some grief is too full for words. When Bailey finally stepped back down, it was slow and gentle, like she didn't want to wake him. She sat quietly beside the bed and stared. No whines, no barks, just presence. The hospice staff entered gently, offering soft condolences and discreet movements. One nurse crouched to pet Bailey, but the old retriever didn't respond. She was somewhere else now. In memory, maybe? Later that morning, as the family gathered Thomas's few things, Emily reached for the metal box and paused. The ribbon had shifted. The metal now caught the light through the window, a single beam of sun breaking through the gray. She didn't take the metal. Instead, she walked to the window and looked out at the firehouse across the street. The red doors were still closed. The flag flew at half-mast. Word had already spread. Engine 47 had lost its legend, but they didn't know the full story. That afternoon, Emily called the station. She asked for one favor. 3 days later, a small gathering assembled at the firehouse. No full ceremony, no bagpipes or brass. Just the crew, some retirees, a few family friends, and Bailey sitting front row on a faded blanket, wearing her old search and rescue harness, freshly cleaned but still frayed. Emily stepped up, holding two things, the Medal of Valor and the small, scorched child's shoe. She told them everything about her father's final request, about Bailey's strange, purposeful behavior, about the box, the shoe, the words he whispered as he lay dying, about how he couldn't save the boy but never let himself forget him, and how the dog, even after all these years, remembered where to look. She didn't cry until the end. My father saved lives, but the one life he couldn't save stayed with him more than any of the others. And Bailey, she carried that too. That's what partners do. They carry what we can't. She placed the shoe and the medal side by side on the memorial table, not in a case, not behind glass, just there, side by side, one for the hero the world knew, one for the life the world forgot. Bailey passed quietly 3 weeks later. Emily was there when it happened. No machines, no beeping, just the sound of wind outside and a whisper of peace in the air. They buried her ashes in the garden outside the firehouse, beneath a small stone carved with two simple words, always beside. And now every year, on the anniversary of that call, the Haverhill Fire, Engine 47 sets out 2 items on the bench beside the front doors, a Medal of Valor and a child's shoe. No plaque, no explanation, just silence, respect, and the memory of a firefighter and a golden retriever who never forgot the one they couldn't save. And the bond that saved them both. Like, share, subscribe, and tell us, what would your last wish be? We read every comment.